Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, but more specifically, we're going to discuss the Bitcoin dominance. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I know my videos on Bitcoin dominance have been fairly lengthy. I think the last one was actually about 80 minutes, so I might have overdone it a little bit. But I can assure you I have no intention on making this video that long. I just want to go through a few of the charts and just look at some of the likely outcomes here in the short term. The first thing I will say is that we have maintained a bullish view on the Bitcoin dominance throughout the entire year, right? And even last year as well, right? We've been bullish on Bitcoin dominance. And today, Bitcoin dominance, including stablecoins, has put in a new yearly high, right? A new yearly high. And by the way, for those of you who say that being bullish on it last year was too early, noting that we still continue to sort of grind it out at these lower levels, I will remind you that if you exclude stablecoins, right? If you exclude stablecoins, you will see that dominance has been trending higher since May of 2021, right? This is May of 2021. Higher lows and higher highs ever since. And a lot of people keep fading it, and they keep acting like it's not happening. They act like their altcoins are holding up well. And while it might be true that a few of them are, a lot of them are not. And it's clear in the dominance chart. You know, a few weeks ago, back in August, a lot of people were very bearish on the Bitcoin dominance when it pulled back to this level down here at 49%. But what did we say? We said, guys, this is a perfectly valid retest of the breakout point. A perfectly valid retest. Also coinciding with a back test, or not about, I mean, just sort of retesting the 21-week EMA, the bull market support band, right? It was a pretty clear retest of the breakout point, holding the bull market support band as support. And while a lot of people came in to sort of dunk on the dominance at 49% in a call for alt season, you can see that dominance is now in its 9th green week in a row, and it now has put on a new yearly high. Now, I'm not under the illusion that it will never get a pullback. Of course, you know, moves to the upside are stochastic, right? It's not a linear process. We should remember that. But in the same way, people should also remember that the move from 60% dominance to 50% dominance happened in a single month in April of 2021. It opened the month at 60.17% dominance and closed the month at 50.18% dominance. So the dominance literally dropped from 60 to 50% in a single month, right? And if it can go down that quickly, it can also go up that quickly. It can. Now, I know some people might say, well, it's the elevator down and the stairs up, but the dominance is representing altcoins, right? And when altcoins drop, they can drop quickly. Okay, so this going up quickly can also just mean that altcoins are dropping quickly. So I would like to say again that while a lot of people have they sort of keep saying that ETH is holding up well and that the altcoin market is okay, the dominance tells a very different story, right? It really does. It tells a very different story. The story has been compelling for a long time if you cared to look at the chart, especially excluding stables. And I think it's a valid way to look at the chart, right? I mean, the reason we look at Bitcoin dominance is to understand how altcoins are doing against Bitcoin. You know, I'm not overly concerned with where exactly the stablecoin market cap is. I still think looking at both metrics is useful, both including and excluding stables, but the trend has been higher for a long time. Dominance excluding stables is currently coming in around 57%. Including stables is coming in just below 52% on TradingView. On my website, it's actually coming in lower than it is on TradingView, right? So on my website, it's currently coming in at just below 51%. On TradingView, it's actually just below 52%. So, you know, it's just the, which coins are being included in the calculation, right? So from this point, we can always take sort of a look a broader view at a couple of the metrics that we've talked about. One of which is total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. I've said many times that this thing is likely an oscillator at best, right? If individual altcoins tend to be oscillators at best, then why wouldn't the collective altcoin market be an oscillator at best against Bitcoin, right? So when you look at it, what happened, right? We bounced off of the same level we bounced off of last cycle in 2019. We rallied on up only to get rejected here by the bull market support band. You can see here, same thing, right? Rallied on up, get rejected by the bull market support band. Now this metric is at 44%. 44%. The issue, of course, is that if the altcoin market is an oscillator against Bitcoin at best, then there's still another 42% drop ahead of us for the altcoin market. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but the altcoin market bleeds, right? And this view has not been wrong. Many people might sort of twist it to make it seem like it has been, but I mean, you can see that the altcoin market has just simply continued to bleed. And there still likely is another drop on alt Bitcoin pairs to the tune of about 42%. And a few weeks ago, it was about a 47% drop that was coming. Now the altcoin market has dropped, and so now it's maybe another 42% move to the downside. What you'll notice is that this metric, total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, total 3 is everything besides Bitcoin and ETH. Then we're just subtracting out USDT market cap, and then we're dividing it by the Bitcoin market cap. You can see that the altcoin market sort of tops out when it reaches parity with Bitcoin. You can see this ratio is 1 here at the top. So when the altcoin market cap is essentially equivalent to Bitcoin's market cap, that's when the altcoin market is topping out. When it goes down to about 25% of Bitcoin's market cap, that's when the altcoin market tends to be bottoming out. You can see here it actually went below that level, but you could argue this is some type of macro Wyckoff accumulation on the altcoin market against Bitcoin, and then it went into this macro distribution phase up here. I still contend that we're in this intermediate phase where we're still in a downtrend in the altcoin market against Bitcoin. And to get down to 25%, there still needs to be a sizable drop. And if you include Ethereum in the calculation and look at total 2 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, it's actually been a more bearish chart so far. It hasn't dropped as much as total 3, but that just might mean there's more excess to come out of Ethereum than has already come out, right? Total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin hasn't even taken out this June low. Whereas if you include Ethereum and look at total 2 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, it's already taken out the June low and it's currently coming in at 78%. Now, last cycle, you can see that this metric bottomed out at 35%. If it were to drop the same amount, that means it needs to drop about 55% more. But again, a lot of that drop could come from Ethereum, right? In addition to the altcoin market. If you were to look at the Ethereum dominance, what do you see here? It's the same thing with Bitcoin dominance, right? That everyone loves to point out the lower highs by Bitcoin dominance, right? If you go back and look at Bitcoin dominance, everyone is pointing out lower highs, right? And then wherever it ends up being over here, also higher lows, right? Higher lows. Look at Ethereum dominance, right? Lower highs. What if it ends up also being higher lows? I would contend that's probably the most likely scenario, is higher lows for Ethereum dominance, but also lower highs. Look at where Ethereum dominance went back in June of 2022. It went all the way down to less than 14%. And it's dropping like a rock right now, right? It's dropping very, very quickly. And I contend that it will likely continue to drop. I'm not saying that it won't have certain weeks where it goes up. I remember just a few weeks ago, the Ethereum dominance had a sizable rally, and Ethereum moved up on its Bitcoin pair as well. And then look what happened the following week. It just got completely sold off. So it's a process. It's taking a while, but it does look like it is happening, right? Lower highs, but also technically higher lows. And so, what happens if the Ethereum dominance ends up dropping all the way to like 9 or 10%? It's a possibility. I'm not calling for it to go to 6 or 7%, but 9, 10% maybe. I mean, it depends on when it happens, right? I mean, it could be a little bit higher. But I think it is a relevant outcome to consider. So you have total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin rolling over. You have total 2 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin already taking out the June low. You have the Ethereum dominance capitulating. You have the Bitcoin dominance putting in new yearly highs. Is this not what we have been talking about all, for forever, right? I mean, this seems like this is what we've been talking about. But I think what's happening is that a lot of people are getting consumed by the news, right? They're looking at all these narratives, and it's like they're so focused on these things that are going on in the space, whether it's real news or fake, that as they're watching it, they're completely missing the fact that the altcoin market is breaking down on their Bitcoin pairs, right? The Ethereum Bitcoin valuation has been breaking down. Now, I know people are going to keep redrawing all their support lines, and I know you can connect the dots here, but guys, this still looks like a pretty heavy chart. I mean, look at it. Look at these, look sort of like a cyclical thing, right? So look at the Heikinashi candles, and I still contend that, we're likely going to come all the way back down into that 0.03 to 0.04 range, which should send that Bitcoin dominance up quite a bit. Now, just to take a look at a couple other a couple of altcoins, ADA Bitcoin is one we have mentioned that is likely going to drop, down to 400 satoshis, and look what's happening, right? It's breaking down. It's now back below 900 sats. ADA Bitcoin just got the lowest weekly close last week since January of 2021. Since January 2021, ADA Bitcoin has not had a weekly close as low as it did this past week. And you can see that it is slowly breaking down. See it, right? It's slowly breaking down. And I still contend that it's likely going to fall in here to around that 400 Satoshi level, which could be another 50% drop by ADA against Bitcoin. Okay? So this is I know it's a difficult chart to look at, and I know a lot of people have been hopeful that this white trend line will hold, but I don't think it will. I don't think it will. I think liquidity is what's driving this market, and I think liquidity is leaving higher risk assets and going to lower risk assets. One common thing that I've seen is people to say, well, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation last cycle bottomed out in September. And so, a few weeks ago, a lot of people were hopeful that Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation was bottoming out in September. But I said back then, I don't think that's going to happen. One of the reasons I think it bottomed out in September last cycle is because we were already trending towards looser monetary policy. Look at you look at interest rates in the United States, right? The Fed started cutting rates here in the summer of 2019. And so by September, Ethereum had bottomed out against Bitcoin. The Fed hasn't even started cutting rates yet, right? Like we're still in this period potentially up here, and there still might even be another rate hike. I don't think there necessarily needs to be another rate hike, but there could be one. And so why should I assume that Ethereum is bottomed out against Bitcoin when last cycle it didn't bottom out until we started getting rate cuts, right? We're heading towards tighter monetary policy, right? Or at least holding at these current levels. But that's sort of the direction we're trending. And you can see that tighter monetary policy has been sucking liquidity out of the cryptoverse. So much, in fact, that Ethereum is no longer deflationary right now, right? I mean, over the last 7 days, there's been another 10,000 ETH added to the supply. Over the last 30 days, there's been another 36,000 ETH added to the supply. If you take it out from the merge, you can still see it's still down from where the supply was at the merge. But if we start adding 30 to 40,000 ETH per month to the supply, you can see it's down about 260,000 or so. It's not going to take very long. You're talking about, maybe half a year, especially if it's around 40K a month, half a year for the supply to just get back to where it was at the time of the merge. So these narratives that people have been talking about forever, for why they thought the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, why they thought it was bullish, they can't even say that now, right? They can't even say that it's deflationary. And I know it's not been a popular view, especially on Twitter, right? Especially on Twitter. And, a lot of people were talking about this wedge pattern, right? And I know many were hopeful that it would break to the upside. And we said, no, it's likely going to break to the downside, just like it did last cycle. And you can see that it is, in fact, breaking to the downside. And I think the issue here is that liquidity is leaving the cryptoverse. There's not enough activity to even keep Ethereum deflationary at this point, and you can see that ever since the trend changed, right, on this, right, ever since this started moving back up, that's where Ethereum broke down from this support level. So that when Bitcoin rolls over, and I think eventually it will, there's no support for the Ether Bitcoin pair, right? It already broke these prior supports that it was holding. So that's the issue, right? So when you think about this, if it does continue to break down, just like it did over here, that's what can ultimately send the Bitcoin dominance much higher. So please be aware that it does seem like it's playing out. A lot of people are distracted, I think, by the narratives, the news, whether it's real or not. And, these alts are just putting in new lows in their Bitcoin pairs, right? Go take a look at Polkadot. I mean, it just keeps going lower on Bitcoin, on its Bitcoin pair. And, there have been people that have been very bullish on Polkadot this year, but I mean, it's not, I mean, you can clearly see that like it's just been bleeding against Bitcoin all year, right? So, by understanding sort of the Bitcoin dominance aspect of it, you could have saved yourself the opportunity cost, right? You could have just bought Bitcoin instead of these altcoins, and you wouldn't be 50% down against Bitcoin. The same thing goes for a lot of the altcoins. You get the idea. I don't need to go through every single one, but you get the idea. And the hard part is knowing when the market turns. But again, last cycle, the market did not turn until after the Fed started cutting rates. And if you were to look at Bitcoin dominance and overlay interest rates onto Bitcoin dominance last cycle, what you will in fact notice is that dominance did not top out in the pre-halving year until after the Fed started cutting rates, right? And we haven't reached that point yet. So until we reach looser monetary policy, or until at least it's like in sight, it's hard to imagine that the altcoin market is done bleeding back to Bitcoin, right? I think that bleed will continue on. I think a lot of these altcoins will continue down. Note that while Bitcoin did get a sizable rally today, technically at this point, it is still a lower high. And also note that while Bitcoin did get a sizable rally, the altcoin market, total 3, couldn't even be bothered to get above its bull market support band, right? No, even though Bitcoin had a pretty large move, right? Total 3 could not even be bothered, right? And look at this. I mean, even after that rally, you still have a lot of these altcoins back to where they previously were. I mean, like look at ADA. It's back to 25 cents. It's only up, it's up less than 1% this week. Avalanche is up about 1% this week. Polkadot is down this week, 0.5%, right? Litecoin is up about 2%. So the altcoin market hasn't really gone anywhere, despite the fact that there has been a pretty sizable pump in Bitcoin. And because of that, you can see the dominance of Bitcoin has gone up quite a bit. So my view remains unchanged. I said before, I think that, if you look at the dollar, it was printing all these weekly, these green weekly candles. And I said, I think Bitcoin dominance is going to follow suit because the dollar going up represents liquidity being sucked out. As liquidity gets sucked out, higher risk assets bleed to lower risk assets. And you can see that pretty clearly in the Bitcoin dominance, right? We are now in our 9th green week in a row. And if you remember, we said that in the pre-halving year, dominance should go up no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD. Dominance has been going up all year. But what's really fascinating is that this is 9 weeks in a row here that's green. Look at Bitcoin USD on a weekly time frame, right? Over the last 9 weeks, right? You have green, red, red, right? Green, red, green, and then red, red, red. So you have 6 red candles and 3 green candles. So 6 red, 3 green. Bitcoin dominance went up in every single one of them. It doesn't matter the direction of Bitcoin USD. The dominance is going to go up either way. How many times have we said that this year? So again, these are views that I have because I have been wrecked by the altcoin market before, and I've seen just how low they can go and how much lower they can go despite people thinking that they won't. And, we've said before, a lot of altcoins will put in new lows in the pre-halving year, even if Bitcoin doesn't, right? Even if Bitcoin doesn't, a lot of altcoins can put in new lows in the pre-halving year. And look at Polkadot. I mean, it was putting in new lows last week. Last week it was putting in new lows. A lot of altcoins have. Avalanche putting in new lows just a few weeks ago. ADA hasn't put on a new low since June, but these weekly closes are new lows for weekly closes, right? I mean, these wicks over here still had a weekly close at like 27 cents. Now you're getting weekly closes all the way down here at like 24 cents. You're getting lower highs coming into this region down here, and eventually, I think the bull market support band will sort of push ADA below this level. And when that happens, that I think is where the dominance explodes to the upside. Not just because of ADA dropping, but ADA representing a lot of the altcoin market. I think a lot of those altcoins would sort of take that plunge as well. And you can see it again on the altcoin market chart, right? Total 3. This has just been a series of lower highs. It's also been a series of higher lows. Bitcoin did the exact same thing last cycle, right? It did the exact same thing last cycle. And it ended up breaking to the downside, right? Now, there's no guarantee it plays out the same way, but what eventually knocked Bitcoin down, and by the way, when it dropped about 50%. Okay, what knocked it down was the bull market support band sort of squeezing it in there, right? There was nowhere for it to go. It was trying to hold these higher lows, and it kept putting in lower highs, but eventually that bull market support band kicked Bitcoin down, and it dropped 50%. Now you're looking at the altcoin market, and the pattern's very similar. I mean, look at the pattern, right? You put in a low, and then you put in this high at that top trend line, right? Look at total 3. You put in this low, put in this high. Bitcoin, trend line, lows, high, lower, or lower, higher lows, lower highs, and you can kind of see that total 3 has been doing the same thing. And then eventually, with Bitcoin, it was the bull market support band that knocked it down, and total 3 is, the bull market support band is sort of pushing it down here. There has not been enough momentum for the altcoin market to put in a higher high ever since November of 2021. And so what happens if this just breaks to the downside? That's where I think the Bitcoin dominance can go up quite a bit, right? I mean, that's where I think the dominance can go up quite a bit. And again, a lot of people have faded these ideas all year long, and it put in new yearly highs today, right? New yearly highs today. So be prepared for a larger move to the upside by Bitcoin dominance. I'm not saying it has to happen immediately, but, oftentimes when you get long rallies like this, you can have consolidation. I mean, just take a look at the dollar, right? The dollar went up 11 straight weeks in a row. And after going up 11 straight weeks in a row, last week 2 weeks ago, it had sort of a consolidation week where it didn't really move. So you could still have something like that play out, but I think that the most likely direction for the Bitcoin dominance for the rest of the year does remain up. And the last chart that I want to show here is the year-to-date ROI of Bitcoin dominance specifically. So if you look at Bitcoin dominance without stable coins, and you look at 2023, I've said many times that I think that if you average out 2015 and 2019, you can kind of get a blueprint for where dominance is going. And I said I think dominance will close this gap. It looks like it's trying to, right? So, if you average out those two prior pre-halving years, dominance ended up closing the year up at 1.25x off the yearly open. Right now we're at about 1.18. So still I think there's still a decent move to come here by the dominance as we head into the end of the year. Could probably get pretty brutal for the altcoin market, especially on their Bitcoin pairs over the next 2.5 months. I don't consider that to be a sensationalist view, although I know a lot of people paint it out to be one. It has been the correct view. I mean, the altcoin market just simply continues to bleed, and people are distracted by these news narratives, I think, to not necessarily recognize what's actually happening with these altcoins on their Bitcoin pairs. They just keep going lower. And, with things like DOT, I mean, think about how many times you could have looked at this chart and thought that it was going to lead to something, and it just kept going lower. Same thing with the Avalanche, right? I mean, how many times could you have looked at this chart even a couple of weeks ago? It rallied up to the bull market support band only to get rejected. How many times has this happened? The status quo will likely remain unchanged until we go back to looser monetary policy. The Fed has been clear. The Fed has been so clear that they have no interest in lowering rates and going back to QE until they've successfully squashed inflation. They haven't done that yet, right? Inflation is still not to where it needs to be. And so liquidity will likely continue to get sucked up. And that likely means that Bitcoin dominance goes higher. And, sometimes you get multi-week periods where, where the dominance goes down, and even over here at 49%, I mean, that was, from June, late June until late August, the dominance was in a downtrend. And now put in new yearly highs. So be careful out there with the altcoin market. I said the same thing for almost 2 years now. I will continue to repeat that at least through the end of the year. By the end of the year, we'll see where we are with Bitcoin dominance. We'll see where we are with the Fed. Obviously, what the Fed does is going to be dependent on the labor market and, of course, the S&P. They're all sort of related, right? If the S&P goes down, it likely leads to layoffs, or even vice versa if you take the other view. But those are my views. Hopefully, you guys have appreciated them. And my only goal has been to help people not experience the losses in the altcoin market that I've seen in the past. And as I've said before, right, Bitcoin gives you exposure to the upside while minimizing your downside risk, right? So if you want exposure to crypto in the pre-halving year, Bitcoin often is one of the best options, and it's the lowest risk option. It tends to be like the best risk-adjusted returns. It doesn't mean that no altcoins outperform it. It's just that a lot of those altcoins that do outperform it, or the few that do, are very high risk, and it's a very small percentage of the altcoin market that outperforms it anyways. And if you just want to take sort of the easier route, it's just Bitcoin, and then if Bitcoin does roll over, which it normally does at some point before the halving, it's sort of a joke, right? We always call everyone gets excited about the halving, and then the price of Bitcoin normally halves before the halving. I mean, it's true, right? I mean, it's happened the last several cycles, in fact. It should not be that surprising of a view, right? But if you look at last cycle, we had, from these highs here, Bitcoin dropped 72%. But even if you exclude the pandemic, it still dropped 50%, right? Before you even got to that, quote unquote black swan. If you look at the cycle before that, it dropped about 50% before the halving. I don't really think this time will be any different. And the issue, of course, is that if Bitcoin were to roll over at some point, and the altcoin market is precariously sitting at this level, how does it hold if Bitcoin drops? Now, I know a lot of people are hopeful that Bitcoin won't drop, and maybe they're right? Like, maybe they're right. But I also, look at this Bitcoin chart, and, this still hasn't taken out this level, right? We said that, we have a series of lower highs here. It has not taken out this level. Also, this long wick on Bitcoin kind of looks similar to what we had over here in 2019, right? Where you had this long wick to the upside. And then after that long wick, you hung around in that level, at those levels for maybe a week or two. But then you just went down and you put in a new lower low in November of the pre-halving year. So I think that's where the risk comes in, is if Bitcoin does sort of roll over and take out the summer lows, the June lows, then how can it do that without the altcoin market sort of falling through this support level? And if the altcoin market falls through this support level, does it play out like Bitcoin did, where the altcoin market drops, considerably? So I think that's what we're, sort of what we're looking at here. And hopefully you guys are enjoying the content. If you do, make sure you guys give the video a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. Again, we do have Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. See you guys next time. Bye.